So welcome everybody to episode 62 of Mark's Mouthpiece. My guest this week is great Tanya Darby. Tanya is the chair brass at Berklee School of Music. Before that, she was in North Texas, taught at Temple, New School, played with Duke Ellington Orchestra, Count Basie, Diva, Paquita de Rivera, Jazz Lincoln Center, the World Vanguard Orchestra, Roy Hargrove Big Band, Aretha Franklin, Gladys Knight, Ron Carter. Did I leave anybody out?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
So,
No, but I've been a very, very lucky girl to get to work with some great people. So.
well, I remember the first time I heard you was at the Village Vanguard. I was like, who is that? You know? And then,
Oh wow, yeah.
yeah, I was like, wow, that's amazing lead playing. And so I wonder if we could kind of start at the beginning, like a normal interview, and just talk about your beginnings in Seaside, California. And how old were you when you started to play, or how did you start to play the trumpet?
I think I must have been around. I want to say 16. It's funny because every time I'm asked this question, I start thinking about age because I'm starting to get to be a woman of a certain age. But it was in sixth grade, so whatever that age is, and it's so funny. When I started, I've told the story a million times before, but I started playing trumpet like totally by accident, and I was actually hoodwinked and bamboozled into playing the trumpet. So when I started sixth grade, this was before they had like instruments. Like if you hit middle school, then you had to take an instrument. So this was prior to those days, And I had absolutely no interest in being a band geek or anything like that. But when I got my schedule, I had band on the schedule. All right. So like a true future trumpet player, my first thought was, how do I get out of this? So I go to the band director, and I will never forget. Her name was Elizabeth Donovan. And I go in there with the sole purpose of her to sign this paper, right? So I go in and I literally say, I need you to sign this, right? And she's like, well, what do you need me to sign? So I tell her the whole story, So she's getting ready to sign it, and she stops. She stops and she looks at me. She's like, have you ever thought about playing an instrument? My answer was no. She's like, are you sure? Yes. She's like, well, if you had to play any instrument, what instrument would that be? So of course I thought about it. Of course I said saxophone, because saxophone is obviously the coolest instrument on earth. If you ask saxophone players, right? And she's like, well, you look like a trumpet player to me. You look like a trumpet player to me. Actually, no, she told me I had lips for a trumpet player, which I kind of took offense to, but that's a whole nother story, And that was all she wrote. So she sent me home with a trumpet, and she said, listen, take this home, give you 7 days, right? And if you're still not interested after that, come back and let me know. I'll sign your paper and get you in another class, right? But what was so sneaky about what she did, like she preyed on my I guess like arrogance and like curiosity, whatever, right? Because she gives me this case with this instrument in, right? So I open the case, and there's the trumpet, and then there's this little piece of metal that I'm assuming goes on your mouth to play. So now there's this challenge of, okay, I need to figure out how this thing works and how to get a sound out of it, right? So that's what started that whole curiosity, So I'm in the house, and I'm trying to put the thing on and blowing without the mouthpiece, and then, trying to figure out where things goes. There's 3 buttons, so there's got to be 3 notes. Just hacking my way through this. My parents got tired of it. They made me practice in the backyard. It was so, but there was something about once I was able to sort of get a sound, there's the conquest, right? So there's the conquest. So the chase starts, And I fell in love with the sound, and then trying to figure out, okay, well, there's 3 buttons, but there's got to be more than 3 notes. this whole thing. So of course, 7 days later, I go back. I'm all fired up. I'm like, listen, I want to do band. I want to do band, and that's how the journey started.
Wow.
Yeah, a
That's a
complete fluke.
very sneaky band director. That's a very good.
Oh, very, very sneaky, very sneaky. Yeah, Miss Donovan. I'll never forget her.
So what? So when did you start to like know that you wanted to play the trumpet? When did you start to kind of get serious about
Probably pretty early on. One of the really really great things about growing up in the Monterey Bay Area was they had the jazz festival there, right? And they were always really really big on education. So they would send out people to do like clinics to the schools and give lessons and things like that. So, I was introduced to my peers early on because we had these people coming to the schools. And of course, the Monterey Jazz Festival being there, that was something that I had been in attendance, just with my parents as a fan or whatever. So once I started to show any sort of aptitude for the instrument, there was that foundation that was already there. It's like, okay, she's got something's going on here, right? So let's bring her into the fold. Let's fold her in. Let's take her under our wings. So I had incredible mentorship early on. There were players like Bill Berry, the great late Bill Berry. Um, Johnny Coppola was another. Bruce Foreman, great guitarist. He was one of the clinicians. Vince Ladiano, drummer, so the names are endless there. The names are endless. And then that sort of led to me going to a jazz camp it was run by the Monterey Jazz Festival that took place in Monterey. So I started to do that early on. And that added to this the interest as well too. And then being in those camps, like I started to meet students from outside of my area, because you're so used to this, pond. You got this little pond, and then you go to this camp and, ooh, that cat's from New York. I bet that cat can play, And ooh, this cat's from. So that was really really cool to get to meet students outside of my little comfort zone, outside of my little bubble, and just introduced to all the different cultures and what jazz meant for people that didn't come from where I came from, and what jazz meant for people that didn't live in my area. How they swung, what was their sound, what records are you listening to? That was the big thing. That was the big thing. Just get introduced to stuff. Yeah.
when did you start listening to early?
You know what? I I don't know when I started to listen as a student as opposed to listening as a fan. There's that shift that we all take. And we spend like our careers getting back to that. Can I just listen as a fan?
Yeah.
But before I even picked up the trumpet, I was going through some of my dad's records. Now, my entire family we're all music lovers, but I was the only one crazy enough to pick up a horn or pick up an instrument. So there was always music in the house and different types of music. I grew up on soul and R&B, with the parents, and my brother was a DJ, so he was into house music and all sorts of stuff, and whatever like the popular music of the time was. So I was digging through my dad's records, and I found I didn't even know what they were. They were these like tape reels. So
Yeah.
I was like,
Real
oh,
to real tape.
yeah, like the reel-to-reel things. So I was like, okay, so if there's the reel, then there must be something to play the reel. And being a nosy kid, so I find the machine, and again the curiosity takes over again. I have to figure out how this thing works. So I put this reel on, and I figure out how to get it going, and it starts playing, and the what started to play was A Love Supreme, and that was the first like jazz that I really heard. And for that to be like your first introduction to something, it could go both ways. And, we can kind of go both ways. But I fell in love with that sound, and I fell in love with the story that was being told, and just listening to John Coltrane, and I could hear his pain. Like I can tell that there was more than just someone playing this instrument. And I think that's what drew me into jazz, was just to really get to see the freedom of expression in musicians, in the field. So that was my first like introduction to, actually, ooh,
I'm glad it
that's
didn't go the
that's
other
the
way.
jazz.
Yeah. I'm glad it didn't go the other way, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah, exactly.
like a
And
50
then,
50.
I kept digging, and then I found, oh God, I'm having all these flashbacks. I kept digging, and then I found Lee Morgan's Leeway, right? Uh, with These Are Soulful Days, just and I just fell in love with that record, and Lee's sound and that fire.
Yeah.
And then that's when I started to seek more and more things to actually listen to. You know,
Now,
is there jazz on TV? Are there movies about jazz type of thing?
now, were you already improvising at a pretty early age? When did you start? When did you start that?
Not intentionally. Not intentionally. Like when I got the horn or whatever. Of course, you figuring out how to play it, and you start to play these melodies and make up stuff and play along with records and whatnot. I didn't know that there was a name for that. Like until I got into jazz band and really started to be introduced to the concepts and things like that.
So you left Monterey and went to Manhattan School and studied with Cecil Bridgewater for a couple of years. I want to hear about
Yes.
your studies with Cecil and then with Byron after.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So that was, is I left home right out of high school, and again, one of the reasons I'm so grateful for the experiences that I had when I was in high school and the Monterey Jazz Festival was because they would have all these all-state bands. So you had like California All-State Band, and then you had what was then called the Monterey Jazz Festival All-Star Band, which is now the Next Generation Jazz Orchestra, that whole thing. Um, so there was plenty of like opportunities to play in these all-state bands. But what was really cool was if you made the Monterey Jazz Festival All-Star Band, they sent that band overseas every summer for 3 weeks, right? So, I mean, the experiences that we got to experience as high school students, like, first of all, most people never get to leave the country in their, entire lives. So to say that I had gone in high school, I'd been to Europe 3 times, I went to Australia once, I went to Japan 4 times. And this is just in high school. You know?
Yeah.
So when I made the transition to go to college and leaving home and that whole separation thing, it wasn't as traumatic as it could have been. Let's just say my parents, I was a little upset that they weren't more upset that I was leaving home. It's kind of one of those things. Yeah, yeah, get on the plane. Call me when you get back. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Call me when you settle. Yeah. Yeah. So the concept of leaving home, wasn't that big of a deal. And just knowing I was going to New York, that was a great feeling. I was
Yeah.
very excited about things to come.
So what kind of things did Cecil work with you on in those first couple of years?
Wow, Cecil is great because I've been really I've been blessed to have teachers that can quickly find my shortcomings, right? And gently sort of take me through those shortcomings, right? So one of the things that I'd always been uh, a really great ear player, and I hadn't taken any theory courses or anything like that. So when I got to college, I was woefully behind, and some classes and everything. So I had to play catch up with all these things. So Cecil picked up on the fact that I had a really good ear, but I really hadn't put the harmony or the theory behind my ear.
Right.
So he helped me to make the connection between what I was hearing and what that sound is on paper, right? What those colors are that I was hearing. Like, okay, this is what that dominant 7 sharp 11 sounds like. That's that note that you keep playing. That's why you like this note, right? And he was able to really break it down into those terms for me, to where like it wasn't daunting, like it wasn't intimidating, because I was scared. There's that period that you go through where it's like, there's so much that I think I can do on the horn, but then like the longer you're in school and the longer you meet other people, like you start to realize there's a lot that I have no idea about this piece of metal,
Yeah.
this hunk of metal, which is where Byron Stripling came in,
Yeah.
right? Because Cecil understood that I had the ear thing. Byron understood that I couldn't play the trumpet. Byron understood that there were things that I could do very, very well on the trumpet, but as far as like having a fundamental, like a brass fundamental, just like what we think about, like when we think of brass pedagogy, I was clueless. I was clueless. So I'm going around doing all these gigs and I'm touring with the teachers and all these things and playing lead all night, but I can't play an Arvin's characteristic study, or I can't play the Schlossberg off the octave stuff.
Yeah.
So it was with him that veil really dropped.
Yeah.
And again, you know, it was gentle, but it was still a butt kicking. You
Right.
know,
Right.
it was gentle, but it was still a butt kicking, and it was just the butt kicking that I needed. So now I was start. Now I was able to put the fundamental under what I was doing, um, and I think that's when the process started, where I started to become a whole trumpet player. You
Yeah.
know,
Were there things with Byron that it's like specific things in like Schlossberg or Arbin that you remember him saying, you need to do this every day? This is that kind of thing, or is it kind of an overall view of?
I mean both. There's both. Some of the lessons that I learned from Byron have nothing to do with the horn. I remember my very first lesson. We talked about self care. And we talked about just things like basic needs to take care of yourself, like drinking water. We don't realize that we're ripping and running. You're a college student, all these trains, planes, and automobiles and stuff like that. But we don't drink enough water. We talked about vitamins. We talked about uh, exercise. We talked about mental self care. So looking back, I understood what he was doing was he was setting me to be a whole human being that plays the trumpet,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because it's that wholeness that you bring to the situation. So that was great. But it's as far as like brass pedagogy, he kicked my behind, right? And I will never forget there was a period he had me, I had to get up like first thing in the morning, right? Whatever time it was. For me back then, like first thing in the morning, it was probably 10 in the morning. But I had like a specific hour. It was like ungodly, like 4:45 or something like that. I had to get up in the morning and I would have to have my horn out where I was sleeping, right? And the first thing that I had to do when I opened my eyes was open my eyes, grab my horn, and play a low F sharp as soft as I possibly could, right? And just do that. Just do that for like 20 minutes, right? And we all know what that feels and sounds like. To wake
Great.
up in the morning, just figuring out where I am is bad enough. You open your eyes, all right, and then thinking I have to get my face to vibrate to play a low F sharp. And there were times where literally it would take like 5 minutes for that note to even begin to speak,
Yeah.
right? But that's where the patience came in. That's where I started like to plug in to the journey of what I'm doing, right? It's not so much about the end result, right? But how do I get there? So that patience of just allowing my body to settle into the horn, right? And to trust my embouchure, to trust my aperture, and trust all of these things, and to exhale through the horn until things start to happen.
Yeah.
Because just like every other trumpet player, I'm very impatient. I want what I want when I want it immediately, especially when it comes to the horn.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so that was a great exercise, not only in trumpet playing, but just in being obedient, to the horn.
Yeah.
Respecting that this is an instrument that we have to address every day.
Yeah. It shows no mercy. That's
Oh Lord, but I always tell people like sometimes I wake up and the horn will look at me, she'll look at me, and I'll look at her, and I don't know if I give her the finger first or she gives me the finger. But there are just days where we just don't want to see each other, and that's okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
I know there's two other guys, the two that you were a little bit mentoring, Lou Soloff and John Faddis. If you could kind of talk about your experience with those guys. I know you didn't really study with Lou, but like he was
Yeah.
around, you know.
Oh God, yeah. Lou was around. Yeah. So when I was at MSM, Lou was teaching there, but I never had the chance to study with him. Um, but one of the great things about being around students, and I tell students this today, it's like if you're in a situation, you're in school. Yes, you are studying, with ABC teacher, whatever, and you learn a plethora of stuff. Right? Even if you don't study with another teacher in that school, you still have access to that teacher. So whether it's like you try to get a side lesson or go through their office hour, or just get all the information that you can.
Yeah.
But one of the most accessible tools is dealing with the students that are studying with this teacher, right? Hanging with the students that are studying with the teacher. And I learned so much that way,
Yeah.
you know. Um, and Lou, it's just, he's a legend. He was a legend. But most of my dealings were with Faddis, because I actually met Faddis when I was, I want to say 16.
Yeah.
And this was back at the Monterey Jazz Festival, because he was there, our guest artist for the Monterey Jazz Festival All-Star Band. And if you know anything about Mr. Faddis, you know anything about John, you know he will find any and everything to pick on you about. Like no one is safe. No one is safe around John Faddis. So he's rehearsing the band, and I'm back there playing, and I can just tell something's coming. I can tell something's coming. He kind of looks at me, So he says something, it made some comment, and I gave him like some smart ass feedback, and from that point on, we've been like, he's like Uncle John. He's like Uncle John at that point. He's been there for me through thick and thin, and he's one of those people that I can always pick up the phone and call, and always count on the fact that he will tell me the truth.
Yeah.
He will tell me the truth. Yeah. So he's been invaluable. Not just on the horn, but personally as well. Like I do call him Uncle John, very fondly, very fondly.
What kind of things did he do to help your lead playing out?
Oh my God! So for years he would hammer into me this thing about soft playing, right? You have to practice soft in the upper register, right? And I'm a smart ass, so I would nod, but still I'm gonna go do what I want to do. So why would I practice soft when I'm trying to be screaming lead, like? So as I said, I'm very hard-headed, right? So it's not until the pain gets great enough that I'm ready to make a change, right? So you get to this place where all of a sudden what you've been doing for years just stops working. This is just part of age for me, right?
Right.
Doing it for years just stopped working. I used to be able to just get up and do a gig and not warm up and scream all night or whatever, and that just stopped working. And it wasn't a subtle shift. It was just like, trumpet's not working anymore, And I remember calling John, kind of freaking out and everything. He's like, first of all, John, Tanya, calm down. It's gonna be okay. But the whole soft practice conversation came up again. I was like, here we go. But I listened this time.
Yeah.
I listened this time. And what happened was I started to do like all my normal exercises really softly, and doing irons. And to this day, irons exercises are like, my least favorite, but it's one of those that I just have to do. I just got to do them. Right?
Yeah.
So this concept of practicing soft, what it did for that time that I really, really forced myself to live in that, was it gave me a chance to rebuild my embouchure and to rebuild my aperture and to rebuild the concept of what my aperture does and what my aperture don't do, what I use my aperture for and what I shouldn't be using aperture changes for, right?
Right.
And when you practice like that, especially like in the upper register, like past the break or whatever, it's so unforgiving. It's either going to happen if you're playing correctly, or it's not going to happen. So through that process, so many things happened. I started to feel like a trumpet player again, right? Because now there's a volume knob, right?
Yeah.
Now I have choices in how I want to sound. So it's not like, okay, I have to wait for a shout section somewhere to let people know who I am. Like that kind of a thing,
Right.
And it was great. So doing things like very, very lyrical studies like Conconi. Those are great because a lot of them lend themselves to the upper register, right?
Yeah.
So you just play them up an octave, right?
Right.
But the challenge is to not play them up and play them loud for me, but to play them up the octave and play them as musically as I can, right?
Yeah.
To still make music out of that. And slowly but surely, it all started to come back. And it came back in a way to where, we all go through chop stuff. It's just age. We all go through chop stuff. But what that did was it gave me this foundation to where, if I did start to feel weird again, or if I do have a bad night or whatever, there's this foundation that's already there that I can go back to, that's ground zero for me, right? So
Yeah.
even on like an off night or a bad night, it may not be the way I want to sound, but at least it's not horrible, right? So there's a fundamental that I can go back to. I can say, like, man, I just feel really, really tight, or, certain registers feel, and I know what to do physically to address that problem.
Yeah.
And it was through teachers like Byron and John that really set up that system of checks and balances for me that I always talk to students about, because we're not always going to have a teacher on our shoulder that's telling you, drop your shoulders. Why are you so tense? We have to be able to take ourselves through that, through
Right.
that. Yeah.
Well, speak. This kind of leads to the next question. What is your warm up like now? What are you're practicing? Can you describe what you do now?
When COVID hit, like I really use COVID just to get back in touch with my sound. Because once you get to a certain point, you're always running. Whether it's you run at work. I got so much going on at Berklee, whatever. So when you're doing gigs or whatever, it's almost like you're just on to the next thing. You're on to the next thing. So I do think that I had lost touch with my soul of what my sound is. Like not what my lead sound is, not whatever genre specific sound is, but what is my sound and what is a trumpet sound. You know,
Yeah.
so long tones came back, and it was really cool because like there was nothing else to do. I'm locked in here, you know. So long tones, and nothing fancy. It's like, okay, so do your long tones, right? But you're gonna expand in thirds and then bring it. No, just do long tones and play down chromatically, and then start on that same note and then go back up. But one thing that I do is I do keep it in a very specific volume cage, right? So nothing longer than a mezzo piano, and that works for me. Um, Lately, I've been getting into bends in a way because I kind of feel like certain areas of the horn I'm not as confident as I had been.
Yeah.
And my intonation got wonky over COVID as well too. That's definitely something that showed its ugly head because we're in COVID, so everybody's tracking themselves at home and sending tracks and everything. And I have a studio at home. I always have, and some tracking the stuff and send it. But now we're COVID, it's like we actually have to listen to the stuff back, right? You got to play the stuff back.
Yeah.
And what Mark, there was a couple times where I'm like playing, and like the tuning fork was just, you could, it was just out. It was so like inconsistent. Certain areas were sharp, certain areas were,
Yeah.
So it was a great reminder, like to keep things simple and to go back,
Yeah.
and work on intonation. And for me, intonation is so important, especially if you play lead, because so many of the challenges that we deal with when we're in the upper register, as far as not feeling like we're playing down the center of the horn, we're not projecting, we don't have that sizzle, we don't have whatever, those times where you just feel like you're putting your entire behind through the horn, but you're getting like a mezzo piano.
Right.
All those things. A lot of times that has to do, there's nothing fundamentally wrong here, it's intonation, right?
Right.
So I'm riding so high on the pitch that my aperture is so small, and I'm closing it up so far that of course I can't move the kind of air through the horn to get the sound I want.
Yeah.
Or I'm riding so flat that I'm holding on for dear life to try to bring the pitch up where I think it should be, So intonation has been a huge thing for me. And as far as how to work on intonation, I mean, there's a million and one answers. Like that's one of those questions, like, ask the question, what is jazz? There's a fight liable to break out. Or I say, like, if you put 8 lead players in the room and you ask the question, what is compression? Somebody's getting cut. Somebody's getting cut. It's just gonna happen. It's somebody getting cut, right? Um, but for me, like, intonation is such a, and this is just for me.
Yeah.
I can't approach intonation from a singular level, right? So, in other words, here's the tuner. I'm going to put the tuner on, and I'm going to tune to this note, and see where that note sits on my horn. Make a mental checkbox, and then go around there, right? That does work, but for me, there are so many variables when you're playing where there's just like how you feel that day, or maybe it's really humid in a room, or maybe the piano's out of tune, or maybe you're in Europe where it's, the piano's tuned to 444. All of these things, right?
Yeah.
So if I can't vacillate, if I can't move and adjust in real time, then I've shot myself in the foot. So how do I move in real time? So one thing that I like to work on is intervallic intonation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'll play, let's say, minor thirds, right? So I'll play a G in the staff, and then I'll play my B flat, and I'll deal with that, with the intonation relation between that minor third, right?
Right.
My G's in tune, the B flat's in tune. G's in tune, the B flat's in tune. So that means that if I play a major third, I go from a G to a B, I'm going to be in tune. Nope, nope. Or if I play that B, if B is my target note and I'm moving to that B from other areas, that B is always going to sit differently, right?
Right.
So I love to work on intonation in that sense. Or if I do have a tuner, have the tuner play like a certain note, and I'll play an interval against that note, right? And I'll work on that. And for me, what that really opened up was having like a concrete understanding of the tendencies of my horn. So we all know the tendencies, like the intonation tendencies of the horn. You play a D in the staff, you got to kick out the third outside. My D's in the staff are like notoriously flat. That's. So that's where that really intimate relation came in, like of my tendencies on the horn.
Yeah.
Right. And my tendencies may not be yours, Mark. That's why it's so hard when we're teaching, because we of course teach from what we know, and we teach from our center, which is all we can do. But understanding that there's so many variables in that as well, and having the openness to approach this topic in many different ways with different students to reach them in a way where they can make that connection.
I'm pretty sure I can play a D in the staff pretty flat though. I know I got that. I know that skill set's it's in me. I can do what I'm curious, what things in your practice you think would surprise people? Because everybody thinks I mean, it's kind of what we talked about, the soft playing, but like you're this great lead player, great jazz player, but what are the things that you have to go back to other than the couple things we just described that maybe you think some
um,
people skip over?
what do you think? What do you think people would be surprised about my practice routine?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I would think people would probably be surprised at the fact that I don't really practice playing lead trumpet. Like, I don't think of it that way. I don't think of, I'm going to practice playing a lead trumpet today. I'm sorry, I'm going to practice being a lead trumpet player today.
Yeah.
I don't think that way. I think I'm practicing being a trumpet player, because whatever facet or silo of trumpet playing, whether it's lead playing, whether I'm doing more of a classical thing, whether it's a mariachi thing, funk, whatever, right? All those are just different branches of my foundation of being a trumpet player.
Right.
And it wasn't until I addressed that foundation that everything else started to pop off, that everything started to sound much, much better. Because now I'm a trumpet player that has voices.
Yeah.
Not here's a voice that I have, and I want to figure out how to get that voice to happen through a trumpet.
Right.
So that's one thing. Students are always surprised at me because I do not use the word range. I very rarely use the word range. And it's more for me than it is them. Because I have the mind, as soon as the word range comes up, my eyebrows go up in my forehead, and then eyebrows all in the hairline, and I'm thinking very vertically, right? Very vertically.
Yeah.
And vertical thinking for me, when it comes to trumpet playing, is not a good place for my mind to be,
Right.
because it triggers all the bad instincts that I have. It
Right.
triggers all of that stuff, right? So when I'm doing endurance work, that's another word that I try not to use too, because it triggers the same thoughts with me.
Mhm.
I like to think of all of those concepts as muscle memory concepts for me. So if I'm working on things that range, what I'm really working on is creating a target, right? So my face knows exactly where that E flat lives. My face knows where it is, aperture knows where it is, right? So the only thing that I really have to do is make sure that I have the air behind the note at the right speed, at the right intensity, at the right pressure behind my tongue if I am tonguing, right? So creating situations where I have less and less to think about, you know. Um, so doing like expanded lip flexibilities, you know, like the Collins,
Yeah.
um, you know, those are great for me. There's some exercises that I wrote out that kind of deal with when you're in your upper break, you know, like around C's and D's and everything, how, because you know, as you get higher and higher on the horn, valve combinations become less and less important.
Right.
Like you get to a G, you can play a G with any valve combination, right?
Yeah.
So getting used to really dealing with how to navigate through those really close partials, right? And how do you find your target in those really close partials, you know?
Yeah.
And how to make music around those types of things, you know? So I would say that's probably people. If anything, people will probably be a little surprised by that.
Yeah. So we're speaking about that. What kind of advice do you give students? Because and when you were at North Texas, you were a professor of lead trumpet, which is like I think the only place where
Uh,
that title exists. And so what do you give students when they hit the wall with their upper register most of the time? Like, do you see general tendencies with that?
Yeah, you know, it was so funny. Like there's a pattern happen. It would always happen like right around the end of the first semester. Sometimes either end of the first semester or the second semester. I can almost guarantee you I'd be sitting in my office and I'd hear like a knock on the door. And I can tell by the knock, the franticness of the knock on the door, that there's some lead player out there with some issue. Something is wrong. I can just tell. All right. So open the door. Professor Darby, my face won't work. Oh my God, you know. And you know these trumpet, you know, North Texas is a, you know, it's a trumpet school. There's like 1,000,001 trumpet players, you know, and they're working constantly, you know, playing in all the different lab bands and all the different ensembles, you know. So there's this urgency. I have to perform tonight. I have to play tonight, you know. So this is kind of cliche, but you know, my first question is usually, okay, when's the last time you took a day off? All right. Now, I understand, you know, a lot of people, you know, daily practices is just something I have to get that in. I have to get it in. I have to get it in, right? Yes, absolutely. But the next question is, okay, but at what cost? All right. If I'm completely shredded, if my face is completely shredded and I go play on that the next day, right? I'm not only adding insult to injury, I'm adding injury on top of injury, right?
Right.
I'm hurting myself even more, right? So then we go through the conversation about self-care. Okay, so when was the last time you took a day off? Well, it might have been back in 1983. Okay, there's your first problem. There's your first problem. Okay. Have you been sleeping enough? You know, have you been drinking enough water? You know, what's going on in your life? Are you feeling? You stressed out? All these things play into it, you know. And then ultimately just helping people, and I say students, but this isn't just students, like, you know, part of what is teaching, part of my motivation for teaching is selfish, because I get to learn so much from these students and they get to learn so much from my mistakes. Like that's basically what I'm teaching. Is like, look, don't do this because I did and
Ah,
it didn't work. Right. You know what I'm saying?
right.
Um, so to kind of sit with these students and to kind of come back to the fact that, listen, the fact that you can play a trumpet, that you play a trumpet, right, is a gift. Okay. So calm down. The fact that you get to play a trumpet is gravy on top of the fact that you're 6 feet above ground. We're in gravy. These are high class problems you're having right now.
Yeah.
And just to sort of calm them, and you know, I get to go through the same thing. You know, my God, my chops are gonna just calm down. It's just a trumpet. It's just a trumpet. And then that sort of starts the process to understanding that we're all human. You know, none of us have superpowers that I know of. If you ask Faddis, he'll tell you he has superpowers, but you know. Um, but so that's usually kind of the process, starting to first of all take some time off, right? And when you do get back to the horn, approaching the horn very slowly, right? And from a trumpet foundation, not I have to play this, I have to play shiny stockings that quarter note equals 60. So let me go shed on chord. No, play some long tones. Do you warm down? That's another thing I'm sticking about. Have you been warming down? No. Well, no wonder your face feels like a bowling ball. You know.
Yeah, yeah. And do you take time? How often do you take time off?
It depends. I have to be honest. I don't practice as much as I would like to. Life gets busy. I get lazy. Netflix is the devil. You know. Um, but typically, like, if I'm doing a lot of heavy playing, like say, like if I'm on the road, if I'm playing lead, like if I have the luxury to play lead. Oh, and that's another thing that people will probably be shocked by is I don't consider myself a lead player. Like that's something that I can do in certain circumstances, right? But that's not what defines me as a trumpet player,
Yeah.
you know. So that's something that I people might be a little surprised by. I just lost my train of thought. What was I talking about?
Oh, we were talking about lead trumpet being on the road.
Oh yeah, yeah. So say like if I'm on the road and it's like one of those things, next town hit, arrive the next town hit, if we have a day off, which I'll take that day off to have a day off, like go to the park and like actually enjoy life or whatever, right? Because I think of those days off as sleep, right? Sleep is something that I've always had issues with, right?
Hmm.
But I didn't take it seriously until I started to understand what happens medically, like what are the medical consequences of not sleeping,
Yeah,
or right?
yeah,
So when we sleep, that's the time that our body can actually go into healing mode, right? There's so much healing and so much process that goes on when we enter these different stages of sleep that are necessary for us to just be able to function. So if you take that away, right, you're slowly chipping at all of those things, as far as being present, alert, blood pressure, all of those things, right? I think of taking days off as the same thing as getting some sleep.
yeah,
You're taking the days off to give your body a chance to rebuild, right? So even if there are days where it's like a day off and I feel like I have to play or I feel like I need to do something, I'll just do some very light work.
yeah,
I'll do some long tones. I'll do some very basic flexibility things. Sometimes I don't even really get out of the staff. I'll just make sure that I'm keeping my chops moving. And that usually happens if I'm really, really swollen or if I'm really kind of beat up. Sometimes the taking like the day off, I can usually tell that it's not a good idea because I need to keep my chops moving at least a little, you
right.
know. So
Yeah,
even if it's free buzzing, something like that to kind of help promote healing.
yeah. And now, and I know we only have a few minutes because you have a thing to go to for long. So I have so many more questions I could ask you, but I guess could you talk? Maybe the last question. Could you talk about ways? I know, especially at Berklee, there's a lot of progressiveness about in terms of technology and the way you use technology. Can you
Mm.
talk about the way you're seeing students start to incorporate the trumpet as it crosses over into different genres? Whereas like 20 years ago, it might have been a person that just is going to play straight ahead jazz the whole time, and now they've got more opportunities to do other things.
Yeah. Um, Technology. I've always been sort of a gearhead, but I think when it comes to technology, what used to be a useful skill or something to do or a hobby is now an absolute necessity. And I think that showed us behind with COVID, right? Because when the world shut down and we had to teach from home, it's like, well, how the hell do I do this? And what was interesting was to see the lead that students took in helping faculty to understand some of these platforms and some of these concepts, and you know because when everything first shut down, Zoom really wasn't like the go-to thing, if you remember, right?
Yep.
There were some other, I think here at Berkeley, they were encouraging us to use WebEx or something like that.
Right.
and it just did not work. And people were like, we need to be using Zoom. We need to be using Zoom. And, and then being a being a music school, so this isn't like, like, okay, there's a teacher teaching from home and I'm teaching like a physics class or something like that. How do you have ensembles online? How do you have an improv class online? How do you teach a trumpet lesson online? Where if your Wi-Fi connection is, you can't judge anything in 3D. um, so what was really great was you saw teachers take a certain course that really wasn't like a tech oriented course, but start to implement tech in that course to help um, embellish the existing curriculum, right?
Yeah.
So now you see students, sorry, now you see teachers showing students how to use programs like Logic, like Ableton Live, like to tape themselves to put ensemble pieces together, right?
Yeah.
Now you have students that are mixing projects, so now they're getting more into the engineering side of all of these things, right? So I think the understanding that the more adept you are in these things, then the more opportunities you have, the more choices you have. It's all about having choice. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And one of the really cool things about Berklee, when you come into Berklee as a student or as a brass student, right? You're not identified by your major or a track. Like we don't have tracks. Like typically for your brass player, you come in, you're either on a classical track or a jazz track. Here, you just have your primary instrument, right? So that frees you up to really evolve into the musician that you want to be,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, it's a really interesting journey, and what's a cool part about that journey too is as I get older, and part of being an educator for me is having a clear understanding that my way is not always the best way, right?
Yeah.
And also understanding that the my goals as a student at that age and my opportunities as a student at this age were much different. There were big bands traveling, like there were things to do. So these students now today, having uh, engineering skills, having music business skills, music management skills, all of those things are really falling through. And to see how these students are coming up with these amazing projects and businesses and other sources of income for themselves has been really inspiring. It's
Yeah.
been really inspiring, But it's also a little, because now I'm starting to realize how old I am. It's like, oh man, come on,
I don't think
you know.
you're well, Tanya, it's been awesome having you on. I know you have another meeting you have to go to in a little bit, but I really appreciate you making the time and, and hopefully we'll get to meet in person somewhere someday, I hope.
Absolutely.
So,
Well, thank you for having me, Mark. This has been
hey,
great. This
real
has been
pleasure. Real pleasure. Thank you, Tanya. I really appreciate it.
All right, you take care. Have a
Okay,
good one.
take care. Bye-bye.